Alright, it's time to talk about replacing the core plugs, sometimes called freeze plugs, but people will argue that they're not actually freeze plugs, they're core plugs or casting plugs or Welsh plugs, whatever you want to call them, English plugs. Don't call them Welsh plugs. So these are 45mm ones that were simply dimpled in the block, and I've already removed them. The easiest way, I think, to remove them, and there's only one concern, and that's metal shavings, but that is to drill a hole into them and then put a screw and grab that screw with some vice grips, wiggle it, and pull out. Now, if you wiggle too much, it will start to flex the plug, and it could make the seal even tighter. Ask me how I know. And then you start getting into a really big hole like that when you finally have to stuff a punch in there. The trouble with all of this is it will get some metal shavings into the block, so you want to make sure that you can flush your cooling system out adequately. I cannot at this moment because my drain plug, or the petcock where that normally would go, there's just a square head brass plug that was stripped out. I stripped it, and it is stuck. I've tried all kinds of stuff. I spent an hour plus on that, and nothing came of it. So I've put something on it to glue overnight. Not quite JB Weld, but we'll see what happens, and if I can get it off tomorrow, that's great. Otherwise, it's just gonna have to stay. So I had another method of flushing the block. That's one way to flush your cooling system. With the plugs out and the block flushed was a pretty good opportunity to take a wire brush wheel, this fella right here, and run it all around each one of those. You got to be careful that these little guys don't break off because they can also become more debris in the block. I think I did this before I flushed the block, actually. All the dirty work happens, then the flushing of the block, and then I just go in and clean it with some brake cleaner. Carb cleaner will work, but it will take the paint off your engine, so be careful. And when dealing with the plugs coming out, one of the things that I noticed between these two is the one that I've really flexed on to get out is a little bit more flat now. And when you put it side by side with one of the plugs from the shop that they just simply dimpled in the middle a little bit with some sealer, you can see that there's about a 1/2 millimeter of difference between the plug when it expands even more to where it is when it's just simply dimpled. Maybe I'm wrong, but it just looks like maybe even less than 1/2 millimeter. But it does grow a little bit. So you want to make sure that when you're installing these, you flatten them pretty good. Here's the tools that I used. First tool I like to use is just a steel bar. This is actually a counter shaft for a transmission, my dummy shaft when I'm rebuilding M40s and M41s. But it's also just been a good solid punch for whatever I need. And I don't have a lot of room to hit this. Because of the way the car is, I'm actually glad I have any room to hit, but it really only gives me about that much. It's not enough impact force. I took a 13/16 socket. I have a couple of these. This is the spark plug socket, and this one was just railed on repeatedly. It didn't really seem to start, but it's funny thing is when you start finally dimpling the cap or the plug, that's when it finally gets a little bit easier, but it seems like starting is the harder part. So hitting this a lot. This is not an impact rated socket, so it will deform the rear. It might have a hard time sitting into a 3/8 drive now, but that's okay. I would also get this. This is a 7/8 inch, which is big, and some people will say you want a socket that's large, almost the size of the plug, and then hit it. Other people with smaller drivers will just start in the middle, spiral their way out until it slowly becomes flat. Whatever works, honestly. Our goal is to just expand the plug by getting this close to flat as possible. So the hammer also would just be used by itself. You want to aim at the cap, but as my arm got tired, I would miss a little bit more, and you could hear the different pings as I'm hitting the cast iron versus the mild steel plugs here. In terms of quality or make or material of these, this is mild steel, and you could get brass plugs, which I don't know if those are original because they all look like steel plugs on all the other engines I've seen for the Volvo, and I haven't seen actually a lot of brass plugs for other applications. I've heard one opinion say don't use brass. And speaking of opinions, well, they're just like you know, everybody's got one. And boy, everybody came out with a different approach to replacing these. And the methods, they said no sealer, some sealer, all the sealer, JB weld, drill and put a cap into your block so that you can have a cover on these things. It just sealer on the inside only, sealer on only the outside, sealer on both. Whatever it is, I did this repair last year on my B20, my 4-cylinder, pretty much identical, minus 2 cylinders, and it was holding up pretty well since. Now, there's one reason and one thing that the shop that I had this engine rebuilt at is working against. And while I think that these are not exactly installed correctly, because I went in and flattened them even more, there are some issues with the block that made it difficult, and the weakest link was the one that popped out. There's a nice big shoulder here on the bottom of number 1. Number 2, slightly smaller. 3, tinier. 4, that's I think the one that popped out, really small shoulder. 5, even smaller. And 6, not that much better. Cylinder 4 and cylinder 5 have a very oblong casting on the shoulders. So there's a thick portion, and then the lip or the shoulder in which this can sit up against gets thinner. I don't know how much that actually matters, because it ultimately, as you're looking at this dish from the backside, the flat shoulder will kind of sit around and the cup won't make contact on it. It's the outside that we're expanding. So in a way, the shoulder size is irrelevant, but that was the one that just was the weakest link. The more shoulder you have, in my opinion, the more glue can be applied to the surface and then sealed. My glue that I used was a Versachem, which is like the O'Reilly brand of Permatex, but they also have Permatex, but Versachem was just an alternative, and I've used this before and it worked, so I went right back to it. This is a gasket sealer number 1. This is a hardening sealer. The shop used a non-hardening, really sticky one that I can still get my fingers tacky with. It's not that great. And that's good for, it's actually called like the aviation grade sealer. It's really good for getting the front main seal or oil seals, you know, those kind of press-in types in, because it does help them kind of grip. Sometimes oil seals can pop out, especially if you have like a bad PCV system or just crankcase pressure from a worn engine. That's a whole other story, but the sealer seems to matter. So I'm of the opinion, use sealer on the inside, use sealer on the outside. And that's exactly what I did. So there's a total of 8 plugs on the block. They're all 45mm of this mild steel. And there's 2 on the engine side where the oil breather can is, on either side of it. And those are only seeing crankcase pressure. That breather helps to suck the pressures out into the intake, and therefore they're under low stress. Those 2 were the ones at the shop said they had to JB weld because the shoulder was non-existent inside from corrosion. Not sure how that happens because they're under oil the whole time, but that's what they did, so I'm not too concerned about those coming out. The 6 on the other side are in the coolant system. They will see pressures of whatever the cap is rated at, and it should be 9 psi, I think. But perhaps it's time to get a new cap so that I can guarantee that it's only going to see 9 psi and excess pressure will be vented, because I don't want to have issues if my cap is sticking for whatever reason. I don't know how much I should be concerned with that, but I'm gonna do some research on it. Perhaps shop for a new cap. But you do want some pressure in your cooling system, so I was tempted to just run without a cap, but the higher the pressure, the higher the boiling point of any liquid, and that's what you want. You don't want boiling inside the engine, you just want to transfer heat to the radiator and work its magic. So, of the 6 that were there, as I'd mentioned, number 4 and number 5 had the narrowest shoulder. Number 1, 2, 3, and 6 seemed to be pretty okay. I put a lot of sealer on 4 and 5, and I railed on those pretty hard. There's one more of these 45mm caps on the back of the head. I don't want to pull my head, I just bolted it down. And I'm hoping that the casting on there is okay enough so that the hammering that they did would be adequate, because for, I believe, 1, 2, 3, and 6, it seemed like they were pretty good at not pulling out when I was attaching the screws and extracting them. Fingers crossed on that one. If I have to pull the head, I've got the extra parts, I've got gaskets, and I got the plugs here. I also have a couple of extra plugs, and because this is such a delicate procedure and a plug popping means you dump your coolant and you can overheat instantly if you're driving, it warrants looking at every component in detail. So we've talked about the block, we've talked a little bit about these, but when you look at the side of our plugs, there's actually a lot of imperfections. I'm not sure what's going on in the machining here, if this is intentional, but it seems like there's a split on the sidewall of these. One is allegedly a taper to help it seal, and the other half is maybe just the raw casting side. I don't know. It looks like these things just get stamped and sent out to customers. But this is from the Volvo parts source website, VP Auto Parts. I'm wearing the hat. And they sell the OEM parts, so this is what we're going with. Besides, this will be the 4th engine that I've had built using their parts and stuff, so everything should be okay. But I don't know what's going on. I picked the best 6 that had the fewest imperfections along the side. The sealer will help. A proper hammering installation will also help. So my plugs right now are in there and the sealer is drying. I used sealer both on the inside shoulder and after installing them. I applied some also to the cap here. You let it sit for a few minutes to air dry and get tacky to the point where touching it won't get it off on your hands, and then you'll install it. The one that had the narrowest shoulder, number 5, that one seemed to give me the hardest trouble getting started, and it was kind of wiggling in and out a little bit. So a really thorough cleaning, I can't stress that enough, should be the most important step aside from flattening these out. There's not a lot of information on the internet because every other car out there is using the modern style dish plugs. So these old disc style are just, they're outdated technology. They may not even provide that much in terms of helping freezing conditions. But you keep antifreeze in your car, and if you live in a cold weather climate, you just take care of your car as it's recommended so that you don't have a freezing block. It's pretty simple, right? That being said, if I do have another one of these pop out, I will keep a rubber expandable plug in my arsenal just in case, and I will also attempt repairing it with JB Weld should my current repair not hold. Some people have talked about the flex in this engine, the very minor flexing of the block because it's a longer engine. I don't know how much of an issue that is, to be honest. I'm not an engineer. I'm not racing this car. I don't think she'll see over 4,500 RPM very often. And while it's built up very nicely the way I like it, and she should be a lot of fun to drive, I'm nervous because other B30 people have expressed that there have been several issues with these, even warranting the creation of a cap where you have to drill holes into the side of the block and then attach some bolts to retain this. If I'm going through that trouble, I'm going to do JB Weld. And if JB Weld still doesn't hold, then yeah, I'll go ahead and put a retainer cap on there. But that seems very extreme. I hope we don't have to do that. Now, 2 more caps I forgot to mention. 35mm, 2 on the front of the head. Easy access if I ever need to get to these. I didn't add any extra sealer to them because I, on the back of the head, went ahead and scratched off the paint around the edges using a pick. And then I used some carb cleaner, cleaned it up pretty nicely, or a brake cleaner. And then I attached the sealer to the backside and gooped it around pretty good. You don't see it, so hopefully it holds. But if it does pop out, we'll do an emergency rubber plug, and then I'll pull the head and press the new one in. These cars aren't too bad to work on. I got the manifold out pretty quickly and disconnected everything attached to it very nicely. And my efforts in restoring this car have made it even easier to do so because I've been using new hardware, new gaskets, cleaned up a lot of threads and things like that. So everything removes quite easily at this point. That being said, there's nothing worse than having to go and revisit a job that you just did. And there's an additional plug, 52 or 50 millimeters. It's the largest one, but it is on the backside of the camshaft. I'm not pulling my transmission out just to redo that plug because, like I said, this is a shop that knows how to install a plug for the most part. You don't see a lot of discs, and that's fine, but the cam plug on the rear only sees crankcase pressures. It doesn't see water pressure, a constant 8 to 9 psi or whatever it's rated at. Well, these things are currently sitting inside of the cooling chamber, which is pretty humid, so I'm going to look online, and I'll put it here in the video, how long this takes to fully cure in the best environment. And I think I should let it really rest, because you know, I'm eager to put this all back together and just fire it up tomorrow morning, but I want these to cure. I want to not have to do this job again. Okay, hope this has been helpful. There's not a lot of information on the web about these, so if you're dealing with this, our discussion has hopefully answered some questions. Thanks for watching. So I just finished talking to the machine shop, and here's how it went. I showed up with the freeze plug and 2 pieces of paper. And the owner of the business said, "Hey, I watched your video where you said we don't use sealer in these, and we use sealer in every single one of our plugs." And I said, "Look, I know, here's the plug, here's how you can see the paint is kind of the witness mark around the edge, and it shows you that it didn't really go seated all the way into the block." And he goes, "Well, do you know a better way to install it than what we've been doing?" And I said, "Well, frankly, I put a different sealer in, and I hammered them a little bit flatter. And that's worked for me because it happened on 2 engines that you built for me." Well, I saw myself in your video. Are you recording right now? And I think that's the part that upset me the most is, you know, as a YouTuber, I should be a little more open about when I am recording other people at other businesses. I should shoot less from the hip, and I guess for that I owe them an apology. But sometimes you just get caught up in the coolness of like, oh, I'm around a bunch of engine blocks and machinery, and it's really exciting as a car guy to be around that stuff. But it is more fair to people to tell them, "Hey, do you mind if I record a little bit, or can I record our conversation?" As I had done with other people in the shop. So I waited for the customer service rep at the front desk, and once I chatted with him, I said, "Here on your invoice, you have the cost of installing the plugs on the same line with installing the cam bearings for one price." And I said, "Even if you just charge me that price for the cam bearings, it's worth it to me. So I'm not asking you to refund any amount on your invoice. All I'm asking is that you cover my cost to buy new plugs and change the gaskets that I need to get to the plugs themselves." Thankfully, you don't have to remove the engine. Thankfully, this didn't happen when it was in the middle of the desert and I lost all my coolant and could have overheated and locked up the block. It's better to find this out now than later, and unfortunately it's happened before, so if this saves you a headache of another Volvo engine with these old style disc caps on there versus the more modern cars which use a dish style, then that'll be good. I can help someone else down the road. And he goes, "Okay, how much is the bill?" So I showed him, and he said, "Okay, we'll take care of that." And he made it right, and I'm really happy about that. I think as a business, I'm still going to go there. I'm still going to recommend them to everyone, and we even exchanged some information on how I seal them and how I hammer them a little bit more, because it is a delicate balance between, you want to seat them, but you don't want to do it too much so that it loosens the seal. You kind of have to get close to flat without going past flat, and it can be very tricky. Other people have expressed using special tools or special machinery to get these plugs in correctly, or else they will leak. And I showed them photos of my B20 when it was leaking from the plugs earlier. And they did 2 B20s together. One of them had no leaks, the other one leaked. And it happens sometimes. It can be very frustrating anytime a job like this comes back. Some people floated the idea to me that I should have them cover the whole bill. And I was like, I'm not gonna send the car there and have them work on the engine, and it takes a lot of time out of their schedule and a lot of time out of my schedule. This is something that I can take care of in the better part of an afternoon. So my demands were reasonable, and their customer service was excellent. So I will always recommend Empire Engines if you're in Albuquerque and you need machine work. If you have these old disc style plugs, they were even saying, as far as freeze plugs go, these aren't technically freeze plugs because these are core plugs, and they're for capping the spots where they cast the blocks in sand and then have to get the sand out of those molds. And that is all something that is old technology. Even modern cars, like they were pointing to a Chevy 350 that they were building, they were saying, well, we've seen these things where the block will freeze, the plugs will stay in place, even with the modern dish style, and it still cracks the block somewhere else. So they don't always act as that layer of safety that we think they do. So for that reason, it explains why online on YouTube you'll see people using JB Weld on old MG engines, or silicone, or any amount of different kinds of attachments or glues or sealers to get these caps to stay on the block. B30 guys have also expressed some drama with this, and they've created a very weird solution where you drill and tap holes for a retainer plate, 3 holes on each plug, using like an M6 bolt or an M4 bolt, very small. That's way more work than I want to get into. If I can get away with just putting in the new plugs and doing them like I did on my B20 last September, I'm quite happy with it. So it seems, I would consider this a happy ending. I'm really happy with the shop. Considering that the car runs so well, this is a small price to pay. It's, like I said, an afternoon of work, and she's gonna be pretty sweet very soon. So thank you to Brian, thank you to Justin, thank you to Empire Engines. You guys are great, and I'm gonna put the order in. I'm gonna order my gaskets for the manifold, the carburetors, you know, all the stuff that I gotta remove to get to those plugs, and then I'll walk you through the step-by-step of how I seat them. And what was really cool too is that Justin was very inquisitive on what was my method on sealing them, and he seemed very responsive to getting that sealer, that Permatex #1 that I use, not the Permatex non-hardening aviation sealer, which I use for oil seals, but I haven't used that on the expansion plugs or the core caps. Oh, there's so many weird terms. Welch plugs, there you go. There's another one. Maybe I should have gone to English plugs instead. I'll see myself out.